Recently, people have been talking about the best way to approach 6-flip cases, and I was pretty surprised to hear how unpopular it is to use the 6-flip alg for them, because I think using the 6-flip alg is the best way in my opinion, and if not the best way, it's at least close enough to the other ways that it's more a matter of personal preference than people might be thinking. I think people might not like it because either they don't know how to do EOLR with it and don't realize how easy it is, they don't know how close the move counts are, or they might not know some of the other advantages there are to using the alg that make it sometimes more preferable than doing it the other way. So I just wanted to go over those in this real quick. So first, how to do EOLR with the 6-flip alg. As you probably know, there are two main cases for 6 flips. The first one is the opposite case, where you have your two LR edges across from each other. So it'll be like this, or they can be paired in the bottom. So what you want to do is set them up to the top, where they're on the left and right sides. And then we're going to do the normal 6-flip alg, but we're going to add in 2 moves at the end to actually pair up the LR edges. So you start with the alg, and then where you would end with the wide R prime. Instead, you can see we've got one LR edge here, the other one is paired in the back. So instead of ending with that wide R prime, we're going to end just normal R prime, U2, M, so we've got them paired in the bottom. And then some of the time also, you can see in this case, you can, instead of ending with the M, you would just end with an M prime and put them in directly and skip to the EOLRB, but you'll have to recognize that as you're solving. So the other case is where the edges are adjacent or not paired at all. So for instance, for a case like this, they're not paired, you'd move the one out of the way, and then you can pair them up so in the adjacent case. And then here it's even easier. All you do is you make sure that your edges are paired and adjacent, and then you put them in the bottom right on the top here. And then you just do the alg normally without any modifications. And again, you can either end with a wide R prime here and put them on the bottom, or in a case like this, you do a small R prime and an M prime at the same time, and you just cancel and place them directly with the EOLRB. So next is comparing the move counts. If you don't know how to solve EOLR for 6 flips without using the alg, go watch Kevin's video. I'll have it in the description. He explains it really well, and I'll just be explaining the move counts and not how to actually solve it. So first of all, we have the opposite case here. So the approach here is, instead of lining your edges up into the top, you'll set them up into the bottom. And then from here, you can essentially cycle to a 2-flip, then an arrow case, and then EOLR from there. And if you just do that, then the move count ends up being exactly the same between if you do it this way or with the alg. The one difference is you can also make sure that whatever LR edge color you have here, if you line up the corners, then it just guarantees that you get the EOLRB case, where you solve the LR edges directly into the top instead of having to buffer them at the bottom. So it does end up being slightly faster in the move count there as well. So next, for the adjacent case, the comparison here is a little bit more complicated because of how the setup moves work. So for doing it without the alg, the standard way of doing it is with non-matching centers, where you set up a non-matching arrow case here. So you put one LR edge in the bottom, offset by an M, and then you can move the other LR edge across from it on the M slice. And then you've got an arrow case here where you have 3 bad edges and 1 bad edge here. And then when you solve that, you can set up your LR edges paired in the bottom after that. So once you have the arrow case set up, from here, it always takes 7 moves to get to the point where you have all your edges oriented and LR paired in the bottom. From here, using the alg, it always takes 9 moves. So the difference comes in with how many setup moves it takes to get here on average. So this case, it takes slightly fewer moves on average to get your LR edges paired into this position. And it takes slightly more moves to get your edges paired into this position, or like the mirror of it essentially. So it works out that the move count difference is about 1.5 on average in favor of the non-matching centers version. So it does win out on the move count there, but it's still only 1.5 moves, which isn't a ton. looking just at the move counts, yeah, using the alg does lose out. In one case by 1.5 moves, and the other one you can't force EOLR every time. But I think there's more to it than just the move counts. So if we start with the adjacent case, first off, the setup moves are always going to be more complicated to get into the non-matching centers version. If you're doing the alg, to get to this case, it takes between 0 to 3 moves. Most of the time it's going to be 1 to 2 moves to set up. Whereas to get to your non-matching arrow case, it takes a minimum of 2 moves, and most of the time it's going to be 2 to 3 moves to get set up here. So it takes more brain power just to get set up in the middle of the solve. But then also, because it's non-matching centers, it's more difficult to recognize. So that is just a skill issue, but it does make a difference. So I still do find that it's easier to actually just get set up and solve the alg version just because of those two things. So then for the opposite case, the difference really isn't the setup moves or recognition, because it's basically the same for both. But here it's really how fast you can execute each case. If you're doing it without the alg, then it's going to be MU gen, and you have a lot of M moves as opposed to M primes, which just makes it slower. But with the alg, it's RU gen, and I just find it a lot faster to actually execute, which makes up for that one extra thing where you're able to force the EOLRB. So I still find it faster to do it with the alg, and I think it's definitely worth trying to do it both ways and see which one works better. So the last thing I want to touch on is why I really like to recommend learning the alg to beginners, and that's mostly because of how easy it is to do EOLR with it. Basically all you need is just the alg and then the one variation. Setups are really easy, and it's pretty simple to learn. If you want to do EOLR without the alg, then you need to understand non-matching centers, which is the big one. And then also just a basic understanding of EOLR for the 2-flip case as well. You can kind of turn that into an alg because it's going to be basically the same every time, but it's still easier to learn in my opinion. And because they're so close when it comes to move count and speed, I think it makes sense to try and learn the alg first, use that, and then if you want to try out the other cases, and since they can be better in some cases, then I think that's also worth it. But I think you probably shouldn't discount the alg, and it's worth trying to learn that first before moving on. So that's basically my thoughts.